All right, so obviously over the last week or so, I was on vacation at the beach, taking a little family trip, but I am back now and I got a lot to catch up on. So I'm going to cover over this weekend a couple of the major stories that I missed. Obviously, we had the Trump indictment, we had Hunter Biden and his special counsel that were announced, and we also had some smaller stories like this that I think probably should be getting a lot more attention than they have been. So here from NPR, they say a 4% income tax on millionaires will make lunch free for Massachusetts K through 12 students. Okay, a 4% tax on just millionaires, right? So not so-called middle class people or working class people, just the millionaire class. 4% of their income, right? What is that? Like an extra medallion on your super yacht or something like that, right? 4% tax on millionaires will now guarantee free lunch for K through 12 students across the entire state of Massachusetts. Okay, so kind of explodes the narrative of how are you going to pay for it, right? One of the famous questions that we got during Bernie Sanders' run, both in 2016 and in 2020, it was always like, okay, you have some good ideas that are wildly popular amongst the American people, but how are you going to pay for it? Well, I don't know. Maybe we could tap in to the reality that millionaires and billionaires have this massive, grip on wealth within the United States of America. I mean, I'm going to get to this here in a second, but we literally have like a handful of billionaires within this country that have more wealth than the bottom half of the American people. So, I mean, this kind of, again, just destroys that entire narrative, right? How are you going to pay for it, right? Well, okay, here we have a class of extremely wealthy people who you could take just a tiny fraction of their wealth and use it to invest in some of these broad social programs that improve the lives of potentially millions and millions of people. So here, let's get into some of the details. They say Massachusetts' new budget will provide free school lunches for K through 12 students thanks to an additional 4% income tax on state residents' incomes above $1 million. The extra tax, known as the Fair Share Amendment, was approved by voters in the November 2022. Okay, so basically, again, it seems like this was a product of more direct democracy from the American people. And keep in mind, I mean, you can even go to conservative states. Florida is the great example that I often point to, right? Back in the 2020 election, you had Donald Trump, you had Joe Biden both on the ballot, and then you also had a direct democracy initiative that was a $15 minimum wage. And guess what? That $15 minimum wage did better than both of the presidential candidates. So in other words, right, left-wing, populist economic policy does better if you actually put it to a direct vote to the people than anything that is going to actually be attached to the, Democratic Party label. So it gives you an insight in terms of the failures of the Democratic Party in connecting themselves to left-wing economic populism, right? But this was something that ended up getting approved within Massachusetts. So credit to the people who made that happen. But they continue. They say it is generating an extra $1 billion just for the state. And of that, 224 million of it will go to K through 12 programs, including free lunch and implementing clean energy in schools. They continue. They say this fiscal year 2024 budget shows that Massachusetts can address critical needs like housing, college affordability, and hunger while also remaining fiscally responsible. Okay, so obviously I have kind of an issue with like this narrative of fiscal responsibility, right? I often talk about modern monetary theory or MMT. I think at the federal level, specifically only at the federal level, this doesn't necessarily apply at the state level, but at the federal level, we could certainly make massive, multi-trillion dollar investments in things like energy or transitioning to a clean economy or things like that would actually be economically beneficial in the long run and would pay for themselves, right? Similar to like a Medicare for all program where the number one question is like, okay, how are you going to pay for this expansive government, run insurance program to cover healthcare? But then you actually look at the details of it, and it's like, okay, we actually already are, paying more than any other country on the face of the planet for healthcare. We're just doing it through private insurers that are ripping off the American people. And a program like Medicare for All would actually be cheaper in the long run and would save a bunch of money because you're cutting out that for-profit middleman, right? The same exact concept applies to things like this, except it's also kind of more constrained because you are working with a state budget that is much more limited because the state of Massachusetts is not involved in actually printing the money and deciding how much money is going to be in circulation. But it seems like even given those constraints, they're doing a pretty good job with it, right? So they say of that, or they continue down here, they say this spending plan is both affordable and necessary to meet the array of needs confronting our families, businesses, and municipalities. I am thankful for my partners in the legislature for their collaboration to get this done. And that was, of course, the governor of Massachusetts. And they continue, they say, additionally, $229 million of this, $1 billion in extra discretionary spending will go towards higher education, including making community college free for students 25 and older. And $71 million will go toward increasing the number of child care slots for low-income families and put the Commonwealth on the path to universal pre-K, the governor's office said. The standard income tax rate, just for perspective, in Massachusetts is 5%, which is actually pretty low by national standards, right? And they continue, they say the remaining $477 million of the Fair Share Amendment revenue will go toward transportation, including preserving highway bridges, improving city roads, and increasing accessibility to public transportation stations. And the total Massachusetts budget, as I point out, is about $56 billion. So, I mean, again, the lesson here is pretty clear, right? Whenever anybody, even at the state level where you are more constrained in terms of your budgetary requirements, when anybody says, how are you going to pay for this program, right? Okay, it sounds good on paper, but you're going to have to obviously tax the working class, you're going to have to tax the middle class, and people aren't going to be okay with that. No, that's not the reality. We have such a gap in wealth distribution within this country between workers and between those who have actual capital under their control, that we can actually just tax the millionaire, the billionaire class, and that could be enough to fund some of these major social programs that virtually every other developed country around the world already has, and that the United States is lagging behind on. Okay, so that narrative, again, is just entirely bullshit. It is just a way to try to divide and conquer amongst the working class. It is a way to try to privatize social programs. Is it a way to try to undercut some of these social programs that actually benefit the working class and try to maintain the status quo? But again, it seems like some governors around the country, Democratic governors specifically, actually are starting to get the understanding that good policy that is popular among the wide swath of your population is actually good politics, as well as just being good policy. But we continue here with just another perspective in terms of what something like this could look like at the federal level. So, as pointed out here by Elizabeth Warren on her campaign website, they say here, throughout the pandemic, working families struggled to survive. The billionaires, they got richer. So what is she saying here? They say the pre-pandemic wealth gap between the wealthiest and the poorest Americans was already wider than ever, but the COVID pandemic and the economic crisis that followed have made that gap even worse. While millions of Americans remain unemployed and families are struggling to keep roofs over their heads and food on the table, the billionaire wealth gap has gone to $4.2 trillion. Okay, billionaire wealth is now at $4.2 trillion. That's more than the entirety of Joe Biden's 10-year-long $3.5 trillion Build Back Better initiative that was obviously partially written and directed by Bernie Sanders, that obviously Joe Biden completely failed to implement, and allowed conservatives within the Democratic Party in the Senate like Joe Manchin and Kyrsten Sinema to tear it into a million pieces. But I mean, just that alone, billionaire wealth in this country could have entirely funded, okay, we're talking about just the period since the pandemic, which is 40% higher than before the pandemic actually occurred, right? So we're talking about taking, a 40% cut from the wealth that billionaires have gained over just the last couple of years. And that pretty much could have funded a bunch of these massive, widely appealing social programs across the United States. So again, the narrative that a lot of conservatives and many liberals try to push, where it's like, okay, you have this great idea on paper, but how are you going to pay for it? This is how you pay for it. I mean, surprise, surprise, you could tap in to the insane amount of wealth that billionaires and millionaires have within this country and actually improve the lives of millions and millions of working class people. It's really not that complicated. Now, again, I am, typically a proponent of modern monetary theory, which again is basically this implication that, the federal government has this ability because they are the sole producers and distributors, and they are in complete control of the distribution of the U.S. currency, which is the global dominant currency around the world. And so we have a lot of discretionary space where we could make massive investments that will pay for themselves over the long run. So just imagine that. I mean, even disregarding modern monetary theory or that theory in terms of spending federal revenue and stuff like that, even if you just accept the narrative or the idea that we are constrained in terms of spending based on how many how many tax dollars we are bringing in at the federal level. Think about the programs that we could pay for if we actually just taxed billionaires and billionaires at a fair level in this country.
Everyone is saying good politic guy has the best politic. Believe me, no one does it like him. Believe me, everyone is saying